Back to one of our top stories this morning. The government is being accused of ignoring people's concerns about the universal credit benefit system. A report by MPs says unacceptable hardship has been caused to many claimants to whom the Department of Work and Pensions has been turning a deaf ear. It comes as a former employee at the department told Sky News that agents working in a call centre were taught how to get claimants off the line as quickly as possible. Well, what's next for the policy? Well, let's find that now. We're joined by Deven Ghelani, Director of Policy in Practice, who worked on the original universal credit. Thank you very much for talking to Sky News this hour. As an architect of universal credit, how disheartened are you to read such a damning report?
Well, of course, it's difficult to hear terrible stories from the front line where mistakes are made. A lot of mistakes are made with the current benefit system too, and universal credit should have been seen as an opportunity to try and fix a lot of those. The backdrop to universal credit is a context of a less generous social security system, so £12 billion worth of cuts across the benefit system more generally, £2 billion worth of additional cuts to universal credit. And I think one of the challenges universal credit is facing is that a lot of decisions have been made in this context of trying to find ways to save money. And actually, I think there's an opportunity to reverse a lot of that on Monday when the budget comes around.
So the problem is we're talking about individual people here, aren't we, and a real impact on people's lives. I'm keen to get your response to an employee that we spoke to here on Sky News, a former employee, who said there was a deflection script in place. Now, the DWP have denied that wasn't the case, but he says staff were openly discouraged from helping claimants who called to try and get help, to try and find out where their money was. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I won't comment on that particular case, but the frontline...
Why not?
Because the frontline... Well, I'll just come on to the frontline organisations we work with also have huge difficulties in engaging with the Department for Work and Pensions to try and help resolve issues for the people that they work with. So whether or not there's without getting into that particular script issue, I think the department does need to work much more effectively and take advantage of the fact that the frontline advisors that all around the UK really want to make universal credit work for the people they support, because that's what puts money in their pockets. And actually, if the government did work more effectively with those outside organisations, I think it would make the administration of universal credit much more effective too.
But what does it say about the culture of the DWP? If there's the other report that's out today, maybe you will be happy to comment on that. The report from the Public Accounts Committee says that they're turning a deaf ear to concerns. They've got a fortress mentality and they are causing unacceptable hardship and difficulties. And unless they change their ways and learn to listen, they'll not be able to make this a success.
Again, well, that chimes a lot with the experiences of the frontline organisations that we've supported in the past.
So give me an example of what you've heard.
Well, so if you're trying to resolve, if you're a support worker trying to help a customer who's got an issue with their universal credit claim and you're calling the service centre, you actually need to be there in the room with that individual rather than just have the ability and opportunity to try and help resolve that issue yourself as an expert. I think if you could find ways to bring that expertise into the system, that would help. But equally, I think when you do talk to frontline workers for the Department for Work and Pensions as well, they are trying to work really hard often and in some cases providing really, really strong and encouraging support. The challenge is, as you've identified, changing the overall culture of a department where a lot of these same issues occurred with the legacy system. And I think universal credit should be seen as an opportunity to try and move toward a much better environment. It's not there yet.
So what advice do you have for them?
I think listen to and work with those organisations on the front line that do have constructive suggestions. They do want to make universal credit work.
What are those suggestions? Give me some examples.
So some specific things. Allow frontline those people advocates on the front line to help customers and claimants with their universal credit claim. I think the Department for Work and Pensions can be a lot more flexible around the verification process. That's causing a lot of issues at the moment. I think a third of people on universal credit aren't able to get themselves verified in what they feel is a straightforward way. I think, as I said, you do need to invest a lot more in universal credit too, because without that, you need to do both. You need to make universal credit more generous, so it's at least as generous as the legacy system it replaces, and that needs to happen on Monday. But actually, these opportunities to improve the system, there are lots of problems that have already been identified, but also lots of constructive solutions and suggestions to help people too. Another example is when people are... a lot of people, when they move on to universal credit, if they've got overpayments or if they've taken an advance, a lot of that money is taken away from... They end up paying that back at quite punitive sums. You could reduce that amount or try and identify those people that are going to struggle to pay that back. And there are some really straightforward ways to try and give advisors the information they need to make better decisions and provide more support to people.
You talk a lot about investment. Of course, it's the budget next week. Are you hoping that there'll be more money for benefits?
Yes, absolutely. I think the work allowances within universal credit need to be restored, but I don't think it is just that. I think equally a lot's been said about the wait for payment. Around half of universal credit claimants are having to ask for an advance on day one, which they have to pay back. It's a one-off cost to the government, and given the amount of savings they've made across the social security system over the last number of years, I think they can afford this to actually just make the standard allowance element of universal credit an amount that can just be paid on day one as a straightforward payment, rather than having to ask people to pay that back. That would really help people transition onto the new system, which is when the challenges are the biggest for people. So it's the fact that you're having to change from a system that you've become accustomed to, regardless of its flaws, onto a new system that I think ultimately will be better. But there's a lot of change that's being expected of people, and you're asking them to adapt to that change without putting more money into the system. And this government needs to recognise that it can't deliver welfare reform on the cheap.
Have you ever thought personally how you would cope if your employer didn't pay you on time and you had to go 5 weeks without any cash in the bank?
I've been in this position myself. So back in 2007-8, I found myself bouncing around the legacy benefit system. I made a claim for job seekers allowance. What was interesting to me was, again, the same administrative challenges that a lot of people are reporting around universal credit right now, but also that department didn't tell me about...
How did you cope? How did you survive?
I had to rely on my savings. That department didn't tell me, the Department for Job Centre didn't tell me that I could apply for housing benefit, which meant I wasn't getting the support that I was eligible for. That's one of the problems that universal credit solves, because as part of that claim process, you get all of your benefits all in one payment. So that's one positive element of universal credit.
And just finally, because unfortunately we're running out of time, Deven, do you think this policy does have legs, or do you think that the government are going to scrap it, given that it is so late now and they've overspent by so much?
Well, universal credit is a better system than having to go to 3 different agencies, administer a whole range of payments, each of which have their own rules. And the legacy system it replaces too often favours inertia and inaction over people being able to take their initiative. That's what universal credit is trying to change. I think for it to be able to do that effectively, it does need proper investment. And there's no point denying a lot of decisions around it have been made in the context of trying to save money and take money out of the system. That needs to flip around very quickly if universal credit's going to work.
And you still have confidence in Esther McVey as the Work and Pensions Secretary?
Yeah, I think she listens. I think there have been changes and improvements to universal credit. Again, not speaking for myself, but those on the front line that we work with have said universal credit has gotten better. So in the last budget, there are a number of quite important changes made. So people who are receiving housing benefit will continue to receive the first 2 weeks of that when they move on to universal credit, which softens the blow of that weight that you just identified. A lot more people are able to get universal credit advances, although, as I've said, I don't think that's enough. I think you can put more money into the system to help that transition, help people transition onto the new benefit.
We'll leave it there. Deven Ghelani, Director of Policy and Practice, thank you very much.
Thank you.